The day my garden was destroyed started like any other quiet Saturday in Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood where perfectly trimmed lawns mattered more than common sense. I'm Ethan Parker, and for 5 years I had poured my heart into the backyard garden behind my home. It wasn't just a hobby. It was the place where I spent weekends after losing my wife, the place where every flower, tree, and stone carried a memory. Neighbors admired it, local gardening groups featured it online, and honestly, it had become one of the few things keeping me grounded. Then Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, decided she didn't like looking at it from her second-story window. What happened next still blows my mind. Within a single afternoon, years of work were reduced to dirt, broken planters, and crushed flowers. The HOA denied responsibility. Karen acted untouchable. The neighbors stayed silent. And for a moment, it looked like she had won. What Karen didn't realize was that she had started a war over property rights, zoning rules, and something far more valuable than flowers. By the time everything was over, her prized $1 million view would become the last thing she ever wanted to see from her window. For most people in Willow Creek Estates, the HOA was a minor annoyance. They sent letters about trash cans being visible from the street, reminded people to pressure wash their driveways, and occasionally argued about fence colors. Annoying, sure, but manageable. The problem was that Karen Whitmore treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for nearly a decade and somehow managed to insert herself into every decision imaginable. She wasn't technically the president anymore, but that never stopped her from acting like she owned the place. If someone painted their front door a shade she didn't like, she complained. If a family parked an RV for a weekend, she complained. If kids rode bicycles too close to her property, she complained. Over time, most residents learned that arguing with Karen usually created more problems than it solved. I was one of the few people who ignored her. My backyard garden sat behind a privacy fence and followed every neighborhood rule. It contained flower beds, stone walkways, small fruit trees, decorative shrubs, and a wooden pergola that I had built myself. The project had taken years. Every spring I expanded it a little more. Every season I improved something. The space became my sanctuary. Neighbors often complimented it. Karen hated it. At first, her complaints seemed harmless. She claimed some of the taller plants blocked part of the view from her second-floor office window. Then she insisted the pergola looked out of character with the neighborhood aesthetic. After that came anonymous HOA complaints that appeared almost monthly. Each complaint was investigated. Each complaint was dismissed. Everything on my property was compliant. That should have ended the situation. Instead, it only made Karen more determined. Over the following months, strange things started happening. Small decorative lights disappeared. Garden markers were moved. Freshly planted flowers were mysteriously damaged. Nothing was serious enough to prove who was responsible, but the pattern felt impossible to ignore. I installed security cameras. The incidents immediately stopped. That alone told me someone had been watching. For several weeks, things remained quiet. I assumed Karen had finally given up. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. One Thursday afternoon, I left town for a 2-day work conference. Before leaving, I checked the garden, watered everything, and even took a few photos because several flowers were reaching peak bloom. It was one of the best the garden had ever looked. When I returned Saturday evening, I knew something was wrong before I even parked the truck. Several neighbors were standing outside. Nobody waved. Nobody smiled. They just watched. The moment I stepped out of the vehicle, my stomach dropped. The gate to my backyard hung partially off its hinges. The flower beds were flattened. Trees had been uprooted. Planters were shattered across the yard. Years of work looked like they had been hit by a construction crew with a personal grudge. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was seeing. The entire garden was gone. For several seconds I simply stood there staring at the destruction, trying to process how something so massive could happen while I was away for less than 48 hours. Then one neighbor quietly approached and handed me a phone recording. What I saw on that screen changed everything. The footage showed hired landscaping contractors entering my property. And standing nearby, supervising the entire operation with a satisfied smile on her face, was Karen. Bro, this is the part where the story stopped being about flowers. The moment I saw that video, I realized this wasn't an accident, a misunderstanding, or a mistake. Someone had intentionally destroyed my property. And Karen had just handed me the first piece of evidence. The more I examined the damage, the worse it became. What looked like a few destroyed flower beds from a distance turned out to be complete devastation. Mature trees that had taken years to grow were ripped from the ground. Decorative stone borders were smashed apart. Irrigation lines had been torn up. Even the memorial bench dedicated to my wife had been knocked over and damaged. For standing there in the middle of that wreckage felt surreal. Years of effort had disappeared in a single afternoon. The next morning, I contacted the landscaping company shown in the video. Their response shocked me. They believed they had authorization to perform the work. According to their records, someone claiming to represent the HOA had instructed them that the garden violated neighborhood regulations and needed immediate removal. The paperwork they received appeared official. Everything pointed back to Karen. I then attended the next HOA meeting expecting answers. Instead, I walked into a wall of excuses. Board members suddenly claimed they knew nothing about the situation. Karen insisted she was only helping the community maintain standards. Some members looked uncomfortable, while others avoided eye contact entirely. It was obvious nobody wanted to challenge her publicly. That was when another twist emerged. After speaking privately with several neighbors, I learned Karen had been complaining about my garden for years. Apparently, she believed it ruined the expensive view from her second-floor office. She had repeatedly pushed the HOA to force changes and had been denied every time. Hearing that made everything click into place. This wasn't about neighborhood rules at all. It was personal. Then things became even stranger. A county records search revealed that Karen's prized view existed only because of a vacant parcel of land directly behind my property. Most residents assumed that land would remain untouched forever. Karen certainly did. In fact, she often bragged about the unobstructed scenery increasing her home's value. The moment I saw those records, an idea started forming. The vacant parcel wasn't protected. It wasn't reserved parkland. And most importantly, it was for sale. I genuinely couldn't believe the coincidence. Karen had spent years obsessing over what she could see from her window, while completely ignoring the fact that the entire view depended on property she didn't own. While she continued denying responsibility for my destroyed garden, I quietly contacted the landowner. Within weeks, negotiations began. Karen thought the fight was about compensation for flowers and trees. She had absolutely no idea what was coming next. And when the deal finally closed, the balance of power in Willow Creek Estates shifted overnight. By the time Karen realized I had purchased the vacant parcel behind my property, the paperwork was already finalized. The transaction was completely legal, properly recorded, and approved by every relevant authority. There was nothing anyone in the HOA could do about it. And that was exactly what made the next phase so satisfying. A lot of people assume revenge means acting recklessly or breaking rules. Mine was the opposite. Every single step was carefully planned, documented, and fully compliant with local regulations. I wasn't interested in creating trouble for myself. I was interested in giving Karen a front-row seat to the consequences of her own actions. The vacant parcel stretched across a large section of the hillside directly in front of Karen's famous view. For years, she had enjoyed uninterrupted scenery that made her property one of the most desirable homes in the neighborhood. She talked about it constantly. Visitors heard about it. Real estate agents mentioned it. Karen practically treated that view like a personal possession. The problem was that it had never belonged to her. Once ownership transferred to me, I began implementing a perfectly legal land use project. Nothing flashy. Nothing illegal. Nothing that violated zoning requirements. The property became a licensed storage and equipment yard connected to my small contracting business. The first delivery arrived on a Monday morning. Then another. Then another. Within weeks, trailers, equipment containers, construction materials, utility pipes, fencing supplies, and maintenance vehicles occupied designated sections of the land. Everything was organized, permitted, and maintained according to county standards. And everything sat directly between Karen's office window and the scenery she loved so much. Bro, hearing how this unfolded absolutely blew my mind. Karen immediately launched into panic mode. Complaints flooded the HOA. The HOA had no authority. She contacted county offices. The permits were valid. She hired attorneys. The attorneys found nothing improper. Every avenue she tried led to the same answer: the property owner was following the law. For years Karen had weaponized regulations against everyone else. Now she was discovering what happened when someone understood those same regulations even better than she did. The situation became neighborhood legend. Residents who had spent years dealing with Karen's constant complaints suddenly had a front row seat to her frustration. People who once stayed quiet began sharing stories about warning letters, petty disputes, and unnecessary enforcement actions. Her reputation started collapsing almost as quickly as my garden had. Then came the final twist. The investigation into the destroyed garden eventually reached the HOA's insurance carrier. Security footage, contractor statements, internal emails, and meeting records painted a devastating picture. Evidence suggested Karen had acted far beyond her authority when directing the removal project. The HOA settled substantial claims related to the destruction. Karen was personally dragged into the legal fallout. Several board members publicly distanced themselves from her. Others resigned entirely. By the end of the year, the woman who once controlled nearly every neighborhood dispute couldn't even control the view outside her own window. Every morning she looked out and saw a reminder that entitlement had consequences. And unlike my garden, that reminder wasn't going anywhere. Over the following year, life in Willow Creek Estates became surprisingly peaceful. The HOA adopted stricter oversight procedures, preventing any single person from exercising unchecked influence again. My insurance settlement and legal recovery allowed me to rebuild the garden from the ground up, this time even better than before. New trees were planted, fresh flower beds bloomed, and the memorial area for my wife was carefully restored. Meanwhile, Karen's influence completely disappeared. Most neighbors avoided her, and her reputation never recovered. In the end, the garden returned stronger than ever, while the consequences of her choices remained impossible to ignore. Honestly, this story proves something people forget all the time: just because someone acts powerful doesn't mean they own the consequences. Karen destroyed a garden to improve her view and ended up losing both her reputation and her peace of mind. If you enjoyed this karma story, like, subscribe, and share for more unbelievable HOA revenge tales.